They came from Mars with heat rays and death machines. The world wasn't ready, but Hollywood almost wasn't either. The War of the Worlds wasn't just a sci-fi milestone, it was a production nightmare. Sets caught fire for real, the military got involved, and one scene, they used actual documentary footage from a real atomic bomb test. Because why build what you can borrow from the apocalypse? These are 20 weird facts about the War of the Worlds. And the bonus? The film's producer had been planning this invasion for over a decade, but the studio kept saying no until the Cold War made alien attacks feel a little too possible. Buckle up. The Martians are landing, and this production was just as chaotic as the invasion itself. Number 1. Before Byron Haskin directed a single frame, before the Martian war machines were designed, before any actor was cast, the War of the Worlds had been trapped in development hell for years. Producer George Pal bought the rights to H.G. Wells's novel back in 1950, convinced it would be his masterpiece. But Paramount Pictures didn't share his vision. They thought sci-fi was box office poison, a genre for kids and B-movies, not serious productions with serious budgets. Pal pitched it over and over, refining his vision, creating concept art, building miniature prototypes of the Martian machines in his garage. The studio executives would nod politely, then say no. What changed everything wasn't Pal's persistence. It was fear, real fear. By 1951, the Cold War was escalating. The Soviet Union had the bomb. UFO sightings were making headlines. Paranoia was thick in the air. Suddenly, a story about an overwhelming alien invasion didn't seem so far-fetched anymore. It felt urgent, relevant, terrifying. Paramount finally greenlit the project, not because they believed in Pal's artistic vision, but because they realized audiences were already afraid of something falling from the sky. And fear, it turned out, was very profitable. Number 2. The Martian war machines are iconic. Sleek, manta ray-shaped, hovering death with pulsing electronic eyes and devastating heat rays. They're instantly recognizable even 70 years later. But the design almost looked completely different. George Pal's original concept was faithful to H.G. Wells's novel. Massive tripods, towering metal legs striding across the landscape, crushing everything beneath them. The production team built test models, experimented with stop-motion animation, tried every trick they knew, and every attempt failed. The tripods looked ridiculous. The legs moved awkwardly, the proportions seemed off, and the stop motion made them look like jerky toys instead of terrifying invaders. Weeks of work, thousands of dollars, all headed for the trash. Then production designer Al Nozaki had a radical idea. Forget the legs entirely. Make them float. Use wires, create an anti-gravity effect. Design something that had never been seen before. Pal was skeptical but desperate. They built a prototype, tested it under the lights, and everything changed. The floating war machine was eerie, alien, unlike anything in cinema. It moved smoothly, almost organically, and it scared the hell out of everyone who saw it. By abandoning Wells' original vision, they created something even more memorable. Sometimes the best way to honor the source material is to completely ignore it. Number 3. Gene Barry looked perfect as Dr. Clayton Forrester, the scientist hero, square-jawed, intelligent, calm under pressure. But he wasn't the first choice, not even close. The studio wanted a bigger name, someone with box office draw. They offered the role to several A-list actors who all turned it down. Science fiction was still considered beneath serious actors in 1952. One actor reportedly read the script and said, "I'm not running from puppet monsters." When Gene Barry finally got the call, he was a relatively unknown stage actor, desperate for a break. He showed up for the audition, read opposite Anne Robinson, and something clicked. The chemistry was there, the intelligence was there, and most importantly, Barry understood something the bigger stars didn't. He knew that playing the smartest guy in the room during an alien invasion wasn't a joke, it was an opportunity. He took it seriously, played Forrester as a genuine scientist, not a Hollywood hero. And that grounded performance, that refusal to wink at the camera, became the anchor that held the entire film together. Sometimes the best casting happens when everyone else says no first. Number 4. The opening attack on the town wasn't filmed on a backlot. It was shot on location in Corona, California, and the production nearly burned the entire town down. The scene required buildings to be set ablaze by Martian heat rays, a spectacular effect that would prove the invaders' devastating power. The special effects team rigged charges, positioned cameras, and assured the local fire department they had everything under control. They didn't. When they ignited the first building, the flames spread faster than anyone expected. The wind shifted, carrying embers towards structures that weren't supposed to burn. Within minutes, the fire was out of control. Real firefighters rushed in, not as extras, but as actual emergency responders trying to save the town. The production crew scrambled, some grabbing cameras to capture the chaos, others grabbing hoses to fight the blaze. It took 3 hours to get everything under control, and when the smoke finally cleared, the damage was worse than planned, but somehow perfect for the film. The scorched earth, the genuine destruction, the sense of real catastrophe, it all made it to screen. George Pal later admitted they'd gotten incredibly lucky that no one was hurt and that the town didn't sue them into oblivion. Sometimes the most realistic effects come from actual disasters, barely contained. Number 5. The electronic sound of the Martian heat ray is unforgettable. That eerie, pulsing whine that builds before unleashing destruction. It's one of the most recognizable sound effects in science fiction history, but it wasn't created in a recording studio or by some experimental musician. It was made by accident in a bathroom. Sound designers needed something otherworldly, something that didn't exist in nature or in any known instrument. They experimented for weeks, running out of ideas and running out of time. Then one day, a technician was testing equipment in a tiled bathroom because the acoustics were interesting. He had an electric guitar, some amplifiers, and a lot of desperation. He hit a note, let it sustain, and then rubbed a wet finger along one of the guitar strings while holding it near the pickup. The sound that came out was haunting, mechanical, alien. He recorded it immediately, brought it back to the team, and everyone knew they'd found it. That's the sound in the movie. A wet finger on a guitar string in a bathroom, processed and layered until it became the voice of Martian technology. The most futuristic sound effect of 1953 came from the most mundane accident imaginable, and somehow, 70 years later, it still sounds like it came from another world. Number 6. Anne Robinson was cast as Sylvia Van Buren, the female lead, after nearly walking out of her audition. She'd been working as a studio secretary and occasional model, never considering herself a serious actress. When she heard about the War of the Worlds audition, she almost didn't go. She thought sci-fi was beneath her, that it would be embarrassing, that she'd never be taken seriously if she ended up in a monster movie. But a friend convinced her to try, arguing that a job was a job. She showed up unprepared, didn't really want to be there, and planned to leave early. Then she read with Gene Barry. The scene was simple. 2 people meeting in the aftermath of a meteor crash, trying to stay calm as the world falls apart. But something shifted as they performed. Robinson forgot she was in an audition. She became Sylvia, terrified but brave, vulnerable but strong. When she finished, the room was silent. Then George Pal stood up and said, "That's her. We found our Sylvia." Robinson was shocked. She'd barely tried, barely cared, and somehow she'd landed the role. Sometimes the best performances come when you're not trying to perform at all. You just show up and be human. Number 7. The farmhouse siege scene, where the protagonists hide while a Martian probe searches for them, nearly killed the production. Not from technical failure, but from budget panic. The sequence required building a full farmhouse interior, creating a working Martian probe with moving parts and glowing eyes, choreographing precise camera movements, and shooting for days to get every angle perfect. Halfway through filming, the studio accountants showed up on set. The production was over budget, way over budget. They demanded cuts, wanted to simplify the scene, suggested using more stock footage and less original material. George Pal refused. He knew this scene was the heart of the film, the moment where the alien threat became personal, intimate, terrifying. He argued for hours, showed them the footage they had already captured, explained why this scene would make or break the entire movie. The accountants didn't care about art, they cared about numbers. Finally, Pal made a desperate offer. He'd personally cover the cost overruns from his own salary. If the scene failed, he'd take the financial hit. If it worked, the studio would pay him back. They agreed, probably thinking he'd cave and cut it down anyway. He didn't. He shot every frame he planned, spent every dollar he promised, and delivered a sequence so tense that test audiences literally screamed. The studio paid him back, every penny. Number 8. The miniature effects weren't miniature at all, at least not by today's standards. The Martian war machines used in wide shots were built at 1/3 scale, which meant they were still massive, heavy, and incredibly difficult to maneuver. Each one weighed over 200 pounds, required multiple operators, and had to be suspended on nearly invisible wires while cameras rolled. The wires were the real challenge. In 1953, there was no CGI to erase them in post-production. Every wire had to be thin enough to be invisible on film, but strong enough to support hundreds of pounds without breaking. The crew used piano wire, the thinnest available, and crossed their fingers. During one crucial shot, a wire snapped. The war machine crashed down onto the miniature city set below, destroying buildings that had taken weeks to construct. The crew froze, certain they'd just wasted months of work and thousands of dollars. But George Powell watched the playback and started laughing. The crash looked perfect, like the Martian machine was annihilating the city in one devastating blow. He kept the shot, rewrote the scene to include the destruction, and turned a catastrophic accident into one of the film's most memorable moments. In special effects, sometimes the best plan is no plan at all. Just let chaos do its job. Number 9. The film's opening narration is delivered by Sir Cedric Hardwicke, one of the most respected voices in cinema. His deep, authoritative tone sets the stage for the invasion, explaining how Martians observed Earth with envious eyes and slowly drew their plans against us. It's iconic, perfectly delivered, and Hardwicke hated every second of recording it. He thought the script was ridiculous, beneath his talents, unworthy of his classical training. He was a Shakespearean actor, a knight, a man who had performed for kings. And here he was, reading about Martians and heat rays like some radio announcer on a pulp serial. He complained constantly during the recording session, asked if he could rewrite the narration to make it more dignified, suggested they hire someone else. The director refused. They needed his voice, his credibility, his ability to make the impossible sound real. So, Hardwicke read the lines with barely concealed contempt, delivering each word with precision but zero enthusiasm. And somehow, that worked perfectly. The clinical detachment, the almost academic tone, made the horror feel more real, more documented, more like a historical account than a sci-fi fantasy. Hardwicke never understood why his performance worked so well. He thought he'd phoned it in. Instead, he'd created one of cinema's most memorable opening narrations by accident, simply by refusing to care. Number 10. The scene showing an atomic bomb being dropped on the Martians wasn't a special effect. It was real footage from an actual nuclear test. In 1953, the US military was conducting atmospheric nuclear tests in Nevada, and the Atomic Energy Commission had a policy of releasing footage to filmmakers for educational and propaganda purposes. George Powell saw an opportunity. Why spend hundreds of thousands of dollars building a miniature city and rigging explosions when the government was literally blowing up the desert for free? He requested footage, filled out some paperwork, and received actual documentary film of a nuclear detonation. The production team integrated it seamlessly into the narrative, adding visual effects of Martian machines being caught in the blast, layering in sound effects and music. What you're watching in that sequence is a real atomic bomb, a weapon of unimaginable power being used against fictional alien invaders. It's surreal, unsettling, and it gave the film a documentary realism that no amount of movie magic could replicate. Using real nuclear footage in a science fiction film wasn't just a budget-saving measure. It was a reminder that the real horrors of the atomic age were just as terrifying as any Martian invasion. And in 1953, that hit audiences harder than any special effect ever could. Number 11. The color of the Martian heat ray wasn't a creative choice. It was a mistake that became legendary. The special effects team wanted the beams to be red, like fire, like blood, like danger. They rigged the lights, set up the filters, and started filming. But when they developed the footage, something was wrong. The red looked orange on screen, washed out, almost pink in some shots. They tried again with different filters, different film stock, different everything. Still wrong. They were running out of time and money. Then someone suggested they try green. Not because it made sense thematically, but because it was the only color filter they hadn't tested yet. They shot a test, sent it to processing, and waited. When the footage came back, everyone went silent. The green wasn't just visible, it was electric, unnatural, alien in a way red never could be. It pulsed with a sickly energy that made your skin crawl. It looked like nothing from Earth. George Pal knew immediately they'd stumbled onto something special. The Martian heat ray became green, not through vision, but through trial and error, and that accident created one of the most distinctive visual signatures in science fiction. Sometimes the best creative decisions happen when everything else fails, and you're desperate enough to try the thing that makes no sense. Number 12. The film's climax takes place in a church where survivors pray as the world ends around them. It's powerful, emotional, and it nearly didn't happen because the scene was deemed too religious for a science fiction film. Studio executives worried about alienating audiences, about mixing faith and aliens, about seeming preachy or manipulative. They wanted to cut it entirely, end the film with military action or scientific triumph. George Pal fought back hard. He argued the church scene wasn't about religion. It was about humanity in its darkest hour, stripped of weapons and technology, reduced to hope and prayer. He said it was the most honest moment in the entire film, because when death comes from the sky and nothing can stop it, what else is there but each other and faith in something beyond ourselves? The studio remained skeptical, but allowed him to shoot it on the condition that if test audiences rejected it, the scene would be cut. The screening came, the church sequence played, and when it finished, the theater sat in absolute silence. Not because they hated it, because they were devastated, moved, confronted with something real in a film about Martians. The scene stayed, and decades later, it remains the emotional core that elevates War of the Worlds from spectacle to something genuinely profound. Number 13. Byron Haskin, the director, almost quit Hollywood because of this movie, not before filming, but during it. Haskin was a veteran, a skilled technician who'd worked in special effects before moving to directing. He understood the challenges, knew what he was getting into, but nothing prepared him for George Pal's relentless perfectionism. Pal wanted every shot perfect, every effect flawless, every performance exact. He would demand 20 takes for a simple dialogue scene, reject miniature work that took weeks to build, insist on reshooting sequences that were already over budget. Haskin reached his breaking point during the farmhouse scene. They'd been filming for 18 hours straight. The crew was exhausted. The actors were barely functioning, and Pal wanted one more take. Haskin snapped. He threw down his script, walked off set, got in his car, and drove home. He was done, not just with this film, but with directing entirely. The next morning, Pal showed up at his house. Not to yell, not to threaten, but to apologize. He admitted he'd pushed too hard, asked Haskin to come back, promised to ease up. Haskin returned, but the relationship stayed tense. When the film wrapped, they barely spoke. But years later, Haskin admitted that Pal's impossible standards had created something neither of them could have achieved alone. Sometimes, the best work comes from relationships that nearly destroy you. Number 14. The Martians themselves barely appear in the film. You see glimpses, shadows, a hand reaching out from the probe, but there's a reason they stay hidden. The full Martian design was completed, built, tested, and it looked absolutely terrible. The costume department created a creature with 3 eyes, suction cup fingers, and a bulbous head. On paper, it sounded alien and frightening. In reality, it looked like a puppet from a children's show. They filmed test footage with an actor in the suit, and when George Pal watched it, he knew they had a problem. The Martian wasn't scary, it was laughable, almost cute in its awkwardness. Revealing it would destroy the film's credibility in seconds. So, Pal made a brilliant decision. Show almost nothing. Keep them in shadow. Use suggestion instead of revelation. Let the audience's imagination do the work. It was the Jaws strategy decades before Jaws existed. Hide the monster not because you want to, but because you have to. And somehow, that limitation created more fear than any full reveal ever could. The glimpses we get are disturbing precisely because they're incomplete. Our minds fill in the rest with something far worse than any costume could achieve. Sometimes the scariest monster is the one you never fully see. Number 15. The film's famous ending, where bacteria defeats the Martians, frustrated audiences then, and still does today. After all the spectacle, all the destruction, The mighty invaders fall not to human weapons, but to microscopic organisms. Some viewers called it a cop-out, an anticlimactic letdown after so much buildup. Critics complained it felt unearned, like the filmmakers couldn't figure out how to actually defeat the Martians. But here's what most people miss. The ending wasn't Hollywood softening H.G. Wells's original story. It was Wells's actual ending, written in 1898, and it carried a specific message about colonialism and hubris. Wells was British, writing during the height of the British Empire, watching his country conquer nations with superior technology while indigenous populations died from European diseases they had no immunity against. The Martians dying from bacteria wasn't random. It was poetic justice, a mirror held up to humanity's own history of invasion. George Pal kept this ending despite studio pressure to create a more action-packed finale, because he understood what Wells was really saying. The universe has its own defenses. The mighty fall to the small. Technology means nothing against nature. In 1953, with the atomic age in full swing and humanity convinced of its own invincibility, that message hit harder than any explosive climax ever could. The ending isn't weak, it's the entire point. Number 16. The film won the Academy Award for Best Special Effects in 1954, beating out competition that included films with much larger budgets. But the win nearly didn't happen because the Academy almost didn't believe the effects were real. Before the ceremony, Academy officials visited the production studio to verify that the effects weren't simply documentary footage or stock material repurposed. They thought some of the destruction looked too realistic, too perfect, too expensive for a relatively modest production. George Pal had to open his workshop, show them the miniatures, demonstrate how the wirework functioned, prove that everything was built and filmed specifically for this movie. The officials were stunned. They had assumed only massive productions like MGM musicals or biblical epics could achieve this level of technical sophistication. When Pal accepted the Oscar, his speech was brief and emotional. He thanked his team, acknowledged the hard work, and said something that stuck with everyone in the room. He said special effects weren't about tricks or gimmicks. They were about making the impossible feel real enough to matter. The War of the Worlds didn't win because it had the biggest explosions or the most elaborate sets. It won because every effect, every shot, every frame served the story. Technology in service of emotion. That's what made it special. Number 17. The color grading of the entire film was revolutionary for its time and happened almost by accident during post-production. The cinematographer Gordon Jennings wanted the Martian attack scenes to feel different from the peaceful early moments, to create a visual shift that matched the tonal shift. He experimented with different color timing, pushing the reds during invasion scenes, cooling down the blues in moments of hope. But the film lab kept correcting his work, assuming the color shifts were errors. They'd fix the footage, normalizing everything to standard color balance. Jennings had to fight for every frame, explaining repeatedly that the color shifts were intentional, artistic choices, not technical mistakes. Finally, he sat with the lab technicians and showed them, shot by shot, what he was trying to achieve. When they understood, they went further than he'd imagined, pushing the color to extremes that hadn't been attempted in Hollywood before. The result was a film where color itself became a character, shifting and changing with the emotional temperature. When the Martians attack, the screen bleeds red and orange. When hope emerges, soft blues and greens return. It was subtle enough that most audiences didn't consciously notice, but bold enough that everyone felt it. Color as emotion, color as narrative. It became standard practice in Hollywood, but in 1953 it was groundbreaking and almost got erased by well-meaning technicians who thought they were fixing mistakes. Number 18. Test audiences predicted the film would fail. Multiple preview screenings showed lukewarm responses, with comment cards calling it slow, preachy, anticlimactic. Studio executives panicked, considered delaying the release, talked about reshoots and re-edits. But George Pal noticed something the executives missed. The negative comment cards came almost entirely from younger male viewers expecting a straightforward action film. The positive responses came from everyone else, families, couples, older viewers, people who appreciated the human story underneath the spectacle. Pal argued that the test screenings had drawn the wrong audience. that the film wasn't a monster movie for teenagers, but a serious science fiction film for adults. He convinced Paramount to market it differently, positioning it not as a creature feature, but as a thought-provoking drama with spectacular effects. The strategy worked. When the film opened wide, it played to packed theaters and strong word of mouth. Families came together, discussion groups formed. Churches hosted screenings and panel discussions about faith and science. The film found its audience not by changing to meet expectations, but by refusing to compromise its vision until the right audience found it. Sometimes you don't need to fix the film. You just need to find the people who understand it. Number 19. The film's most famous image, a Martian war machine rising from the crater, was created using a technique called in-camera effects that no longer exists in modern filmmaking. There was no compositing, no post-production trickery. Everything had to be perfect in the moment the camera rolled. The miniature set was built with forced perspective, making the crater look massive while keeping it small enough to fit in a studio. The war machine was suspended on wires, operated by multiple technicians in perfect synchronization. The lighting was choreographed to the second, creating the glow effect as the machine emerged. And the camera itself was mounted on a custom rig that created the slow push-in that makes the shot so dramatic. They had one chance. If anything went wrong, the wires snapped, the timing was off, the lighting failed, they'd have to rebuild the entire setup and try again days later. The pressure was immense. When the director called action, the room went silent. The machine rose slowly, the lights pulsed, the camera moved in, and for 30 perfect seconds, everything worked. When it was over, the crew erupted in applause. They knew they'd just captured something that would define the film. That single shot appears in nearly every documentary, retrospective, and tribute about 1950s science fiction. One take, one moment, one perfect execution of a technique that CGI has made obsolete. Number 20. When the film premiered in August 1953, it wasn't just a movie release. It became a cultural event that coincided with genuine Cold War anxiety. That same month, the Soviet Union had tested their first hydrogen bomb, escalating nuclear tensions to new heights. Americans were building fallout shelters, schools were running duck-and-cover drills, and the fear of annihilation from the sky felt very real. Walking into a theater to watch The War of the Worlds wasn't escapism. It was confronting the same existential dread that dominated the news, just wrapped in Martian metal instead of Soviet missiles. Some newspapers ran reviews that barely mentioned the film's quality, instead focusing on what it revealed about American fears and preparedness. Psychologists wrote articles about why audiences were drawn to invasion narratives during times of geopolitical stress. The film became a Rorschach test for Cold War anxiety, with different viewers seeing different meanings in the same story. Some found comfort in humanity's eventual survival. Others saw a warning about technological hubris. Many simply experienced their fears in a safe environment, confronting annihilation knowing they'd walk out alive afterward. The War of the Worlds succeeded not despite its timing, but because of it. Sometimes a film becomes more than entertainment when it accidentally speaks to the exact moment the world is living through. Bonus fact: the original Martian war machine props were supposed to be destroyed after filming wrapped, standard practice to prevent them from appearing in cheap B-movies or being sold as scrap. But one of the special effects technicians couldn't bear to see them destroyed. He secretly took 3 of the miniature war machines home, storing them in his garage for decades. His family thought he was crazy, wasting space on old movie junk that nobody cared about anymore. But he preserved them carefully, kept them safe, never told anyone outside his family. Fast forward to the 1970s, when science fiction conventions started becoming popular and movie memorabilia became collectible. The technician, now retired, brought one of the war machines to a convention, not to sell, but just to show people. The response was overwhelming. Fans surrounded him, asking questions, taking photos, treating this battered prop like a holy relic. Museums started calling. Collectors offered huge sums. He donated one to the Smithsonian, sold another to a private collector, and kept the third for himself. That garage he'd been storing movie junk in was actually preserving film history. Today, those war machines are worth hundreds of thousands of dollars each. displayed in museums, studied by film historians, celebrated as masterpieces of practical effects, all because one technician refused to let them die. Sometimes saving the past requires a little quiet rebellion.